In 1823, deep in the quiet countryside of Pennsylvania, a funeral home stood at the edge of town. It looked ordinary. White wooden walls, tall, narrow windows, a black carriage parked outside. The family who ran it were known as respectable, God-fearing people. They handled the dead with care. They prayed with grieving families. They lowered coffins into the earth with solemn faces. But something wasn't right. Travelers passing through town began to disappear. A merchant on his way to Philadelphia, a widow searching for distant relatives, a farmhand who stopped for a night's rest. None of them were seen again. At first, the town blamed bandits, wild animals, bad luck. But then came the smell. Neighbors whispered about strange odors drifting from the funeral home long after midnight. Some claimed they heard banging beneath the floorboards. Others swore they saw lantern light flickering in the basement long after funerals had ended. Still, no one dared accuse them, until one coffin was opened. A grieving brother demanded to see his sibling one last time before burial. The family hesitated. They insisted the body had already been prepared. When the lid was finally lifted, it wasn't his brother. The face inside was pale, unfamiliar, stitched. The grave had been switched. Panic spread through the town like wildfire. When an angry mob forced its way into the funeral home, what they discovered beneath the chapel turned whispers into horror. Hidden rooms, iron restraints bolted to stone walls, tables stained dark with something that was not wine. The family had turned death into a business, but not in the way anyone imagined. It is believed they lured lonely travelers inside, poisoned them quietly, and repurposed the bodies for burial payments, medical sales, and insurance fraud. For years, they profited from grief. For years, no one questioned them. And the most terrifying part, they smiled at every funeral. When the townspeople uncovered the hidden basement in rural Pennsylvania, fear turned into fury. The family was arrested before sunrise, but even in chains, and they showed no panic. The father remained calm. The mother prayed softly. The eldest son stared at the crowd, almost amused. During the investigation, authorities discovered ledgers hidden behind a false wall. Names of travelers, dates, payments received, insurance claims filed. Beside some names, a small black mark appeared. That mark meant one thing: they won't be leaving. Doctors from nearby towns were called to examine the evidence. Some bodies showed signs of poisoning. Others had surgical cuts, precise, deliberate. In 1823, medical schools desperately needed cadavers. Grave robbing was common. But this? This was organized. This was systematic. At the trial, the courtroom overflowed. Families of the missing traveled miles for answers. The prosecution claimed the funeral home was a trap, a place where the lonely and vulnerable were welcomed and never walked out alive. But the defense argued something chilling. There is no proof they killed anyone. And technically, there wasn't. No witnesses, no signed confessions, only bodies that could no longer speak. Rumors spread that local officials had quietly benefited, that certain doctors paid well for fresh specimens, that the family wasn't alone in their operation. When the verdict was finally delivered, it shocked the town. The father and eldest son were convicted of fraud and illegal body trading, but not murder. The mother was released. Within months, whispers claimed she had moved west and opened another funeral service under a different name. The original building was burned to the ground by townspeople who feared what lingered beneath it. But ashes do not erase history, and some believe the business of death simply changed addresses. After the trial, the ashes of the burned funeral home settled quietly over rural Pennsylvania. But fear does not burn so easily. For years, children were warned never to wander near the blackened land where the building once stood. Farmers claimed their horses refused to pass it at night. Some swore they heard faint knocking beneath the soil, as if something long buried still demanded to be heard. Official records listed the case as fraud, but the town knew better. Merchants continued disappearing along distant roads. Small communities reported unfamiliar funeral services appearing suddenly, run by polite strangers offering affordable burials and discreet handling of the dead. Coincidence? Or evolution? Historians later uncovered fragments of letters suggesting the released mother may have traveled west under a new identity. One document mentioned a similar basement layout. Another described a funeral director who insisted on sealing coffins personally, no family allowed to inspect. The pattern was familiar, the method refined. By the late 1800s, stories of death houses circulated across America, places where grief became currency and bodies became product. Whether directly linked or simply inspired, the legend of the 1823 family had already rooted itself deep into American folklore. But here is the most disturbing truth. Evil rarely looks monstrous. It wears black suits. It speaks softly. It offers condolences. And sometimes, it runs the very place you trust to bury your loved ones. The original family name faded from official history. Yet the story survived, because fear survives. And somewhere in the quiet corners of history, beneath records marked incomplete and testimonies long forgotten, one question remains. How many funerals were not funerals at all? And how many smiles hid something far darker? Decades passed in rural Pennsylvania. The land where the funeral home once stood was eventually sold. A small chapel was built over it, as if prayer could silence what happened beneath. But silence can be suspicious. In 1901, construction workers repairing the chapel floor made a discovery that reopened old wounds. Beneath layers of stone and soil, they found wooden fragments, rusted iron rings, and bone, more bone than any official record had ever listed. The town council quickly intervened. The remains were collected. No public report was issued. Newspapers received a short statement calling it unrelated burial debris. The story was buried again, but whispers spread beyond the town. Researchers decades later noticed missing death certificates from the 1820s, insurance claims filed without corresponding burial permits, entire traveler logs that ended abruptly near the same county road. Patterns, always patterns. Some believe the family's operation was the prototype of something larger, a hidden trade that thrived in the shadows of early American expansion. In an era before strict identification laws, before centralized records, disappearing was easy, especially if someone helped you disappear. The chapel eventually closed. Locals say the ground there sinks slightly every few years, as if settling over hollow space. Paranormal investigators have claimed cold spots and electromagnetic disturbances, though no official excavation has ever been approved. Perhaps the truth is too inconvenient, because if the real number of victims were ever confirmed, it wouldn't just expose one family. It would expose everyone who looked away. And maybe that is the final horror. Not the killings. Not the hidden basement. Not the stolen identities. But the town that chose comfort over truth. History remembers the fire. But fear remembers everything.